Long before empires ruled the world, there was a kingdom chosen by God, a city that shone like gold beneath the sun. But when pride entered the hearts of men, the walls of Jerusalem began to crumble. The mighty Babylonian army marched through the gates, their banners burning red against the sky. Among the captives taken that day was a young man named Daniel, a boy of faith, wisdom, and courage. He watched as his home burned, yet his heart did not. He whispered a promise to the God of Israel, "Even in exile, I will not forget you." The journey to Babylon was long and cruel. Chains cut into his wrists, and the desert wind carried the cries of his people. Yet while others cursed their fate, Daniel prayed. When they finally reached the heart of Babylon, the city dazzled like fire and gold. Temples to false gods reached toward the heavens, and statues of kings stood taller than mountains. Daniel was brought before the court of the great king Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the world's most powerful empire. The king ordered his officials to train the captives, to teach them the language of Babylon, its laws, its gods, its pride. Daniel and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were chosen. They were given new names, new clothes, new food. But deep inside, Daniel knew that his heart belonged to only one king. When the royal servants placed plates of rich meat and wine before them, Daniel felt a weight in his soul. These meals were forbidden by his faith, and to eat them would mean surrender. So Daniel spoke gently, yet firmly. He asked the chief official to let them eat only vegetables and water for 10 days. The man was hesitant, fearing for his own life. He worried Daniel would grow weak and fall behind the others, and the king would hold him responsible. But Daniel's eyes held no fear. "Please test us," he said. "If we are weaker after 10 days, then do as you wish. But if we are stronger, know that my God provides." 10 days passed, and when the official looked upon them again, Daniel and his friends stood taller, their minds sharper, and their faces brighter than all the others. They glowed with health and peace, while the others looked heavy and dull. The official was amazed and said nothing more. From that day forward, Daniel's name began to spread through the palace halls. He learned the ways of the empire, but he never forgot the laws of heaven. Wisdom was found in his words, and grace followed his every step. Soon the king himself would come to hear of him. But one night the peace of Babylon shattered. King Nebuchadnezzar awoke trembling from a terrible dream. His eyes were wild with fear. He called for his magicians, his astrologers, and his sorcerers. They bowed before him, and the king's voice boomed, "Tell me my dream and its meaning. If you cannot, you shall all die." The wise men begged for mercy, asking the king to tell them the dream first, but he refused. "If you are truly wise, you will know the dream without my words," he thundered. Panic filled the palace. None could answer. The decree was given. All wise men of Babylon were to be executed. When Daniel heard the command, he didn't panic. He calmly asked for time. He went to his home, fell to his knees, and prayed with his friends. Together they cried out to heaven for mercy, asking God to reveal the secret of the king's dream. That night, as Daniel slept, a vision came to him like fire in the darkness. He saw the great statue from the king's dream, a head of gold, a chest of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. Then he heard a sound like thunder, and a stone, cut without human hands, struck the statue and shattered it into dust. Daniel awoke in awe and whispered, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and power are his." The next morning, he was brought before the king. The guards watched him, unsure if this young captive would survive the moment. Daniel looked up at the throne and said, "O king, no wise man on earth can reveal your dream, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." The court fell silent. Daniel continued, describing the exact dream the king had seen. He then revealed its meaning. "You, O king, are that head of gold, are that head of After you shall rise another kingdom, and then another, each one different from the one before, until the final kingdom of iron and clay is crushed by a stone, the everlasting kingdom of God, which will never be destroyed." The king rose from his throne, speechless. His face turned from pale to full of wonder. In front of his entire court, he fell on his face and declared, "Truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." He bowed before Daniel and rewarded him with riches, power, and honor. The people cheered, and Daniel was placed above all the wise men of Babylon. But in the shadows of the court, envy began to stir. Some whispered that Daniel's power had grown too great. Others mocked the faith that gave him such favor. Yet Daniel knew this was only the beginning, for every victory of faith is often followed by a greater trial. That night, as the city slept, Daniel stood on the palace balcony gazing at the stars, the same stars he had once seen above Jerusalem. He knew that the God who ruled the heavens still ruled in Babylon, but deep inside he felt the weight of coming storms, tests that would burn hotter than any fire. Because faith that shines brightly will always attract the darkness. The night wind whispered through the palm trees, carrying the faint sound of Babylon's drums. Daniel closed his eyes and prayed softly, "Lord, make me faithful, even when the world forgets you." Far below, unseen by Daniel, the jealous eyes of men were already watching him, plotting in silence. The glory of Babylon filled the earth. Its golden temples touched the sky, and its rivers ran like mirrors, reflecting the light of 1,000 fires. In this dazzling city, Daniel, a Hebrew captive, now walked among the greatest of men, elevated from slavery to the very throne room of power. The king trusted him, the people honored him, and his God gave him wisdom that no other man possessed. But with every great rise comes the dark shadow of jealousy. The counselors of Babylon, the wise men and satraps, whispered behind closed doors, watching Daniel with bitter envy. How could a foreigner, a slave, become the most trusted man in the entire empire? They couldn't understand it, but Daniel didn't seek their approval. He served quietly, his days framed by prayer, never letting the deafening noise of Babylon drown out the quiet voice of heaven. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar, in a display of his immense power, built a colossal statue of pure gold that shone brighter than the sun itself. Trumpets blared and heralds shouted through the streets, their voices echoing off the stone walls. People of every nation, language, and tongue, when you hear the music play, you must fall down and worship the golden image. Whoever refuses will be thrown into a blazing furnace. The crowds gathered, a sea of faces turned toward the glittering idol. Then the music began. Drums thundered like an approaching storm, flutes cried out, and a wave of movement swept across the plain as one by one the people bowed low to the ground. But amidst the bowing masses, 3 figures remained standing tall. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Daniel's friends, would not bend their knees. Their hearts, their allegiance, belonged to a far greater king. The guards seized them immediately, dragging them before the furious king. His voice, usually calm and commanding, now shook the air with rage. "Is it true," he roared, "that you will not worship the image I have made? I will give you one more chance. If you bow, you will live. If you do not, you will burn." The 3 men looked at him, their faces calm, their eyes without fear. One of them spoke, his voice steady and clear. "O king, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The God we serve is able to save us from the fire, and he will rescue us from your hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will never bow to your gods or worship the golden image you have set up." The king's face twisted in fury. His rage ignited like the furnace itself. He screamed an order for it to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The fire roared, its flames leaping into the sky, so hot that the soldiers who carried the 3 men were instantly consumed by the heat. The condemned were bound and thrown into the heart of the inferno. The king watched, his eyes narrowed, expecting to hear screams of agony, but there were none. Instead, a look of shock spread across his face, his skin turning pale. He leaned closer, squinting against the blinding light, and shouted to his counselors, "Did we not throw 3 men bound into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." "Look," he cried out, his voice filled with disbelief. "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." The furnace, a place of execution, had become a place of glory. The fire that was meant to destroy became the stage for a breathtaking miracle. When the men stepped out, their clothes were not even scorched. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and there wasn't even the smell of smoke on them. The king trembled before them. He raised his voice, not in anger but in awe, and declared for all to hear, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants. There is no other God who can save in this way." Daniel watched from afar, his heart swelling with awe and gratitude. He knew the God who saved his friends from the fire was the same God who had guided him from the ruins of Jerusalem to this foreign land. But as peace returned to Babylon, so did pride. The king, it seemed, began to forget the lesson he had learned. Months later, King Nebuchadnezzar had another disturbing dream. He called for Daniel once again. The dream was strange and unsettling, a vision of a giant tree that reached to the heavens, giving shade and food to the whole earth. But suddenly a holy messenger, a watcher from heaven, commanded, "Cut down the tree and chop off its branches." Daniel's heart was troubled as he interpreted the vision. He spoke gently to the king, "O king, the tree is you. You have grown great and strong, but your pride will bring you low. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms of men." The king listened, but pride is a silent, creeping poison. A year passed. As he stood on the roof of his royal palace, looking out over the magnificent city he had built, he said to himself, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Before the words had even left his lips, a voice thundered from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, this is what is decreed for you. Your royal authority has been taken from you." In that single, terrifying moment, the mighty king fell. His mind broke. His crown rolled into the dust. He crawled out of his palace and into the wilderness like an animal, his hair growing long like eagle's feathers, his nails like the claws of a bird. For 7 long years he wandered, forgotten by men, a wild creature in the land he once ruled, until one night, under a canopy of stars, he finally lifted his eyes to heaven and whispered, "Now I know that the Most High rules over all the kingdoms of men." As he humbled himself, his sanity returned, his throne and crown were restored to him, and he proclaimed to every nation, "The King of Heaven does everything right, and all his ways are just." Years passed. Empires shifted like sand in the desert. Daniel continued to serve faithfully, his wisdom respected even under new rulers. He grew older, but his spirit, his connection to God, never dimmed. Then came King Darius, a ruler who greatly admired Daniel's wisdom and integrity, but the new counselors and satraps despised him just as their predecessors had. They plotted in secret, whispering, "We will never find any basis for charges against this Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So they went to the king and showered him with flattery, saying, "O King Darius, live forever. We have all agreed that you should make a decree that for the next 30 days no one may pray to any god or man except to you, O king. Whoever disobeys shall be thrown into the den of lions." The king, his pride stroked and completely unsuspecting of their trap, agreed. The decree was written, sealed with his royal ring, and spread across the entire land. Daniel heard about the new law. And still he went to his room, opened his window that faced toward Jerusalem, and knelt to pray 3 times a day, just as he always had. His quiet voice rose softly above the noise of Babylon, a prayer of peace and unwavering faith in a city of fear. But his enemies were waiting. They burst into his chamber and cried out in triumph, "We have found him!" The Hebrew still prays to his God, defying the king's decree. They dragged him before the king. Darius's face fell when he saw Daniel. He realized he had been tricked. He spent the entire day trying to save him, searching for a loophole in the law, but the decrees of the Medes and Persians could not be changed. With deep sorrow in his eyes, the king said to his trusted friend, "May your God, whom you serve so continually, deliver you." The guards seized Daniel and led him to the edge of the lion's den. The air was thick with the smell of dust and animal fear. From the darkness below came the low, rumbling growls and the scraping of claws on stone. Daniel looked into the black pit and felt no terror. His heart was steady. He whispered, "My God is able." A great stone was rolled across the entrance, and the king's seal was pressed into the wet clay, locking it shut. The night was long and silent. The king could not eat, he could not sleep. He paced the halls of his palace until dawn, praying for a miracle he wasn't sure would come. As the first light of morning broke over the horizon, Darius ran to the den, his voice shaking with dread and a sliver of hope. He called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to save you from the lions?" The sound that came back from the darkness of the pit would change history. What Daniel said next would echo through every kingdom on earth. The sun rose, painting the golden walls of Babylon in light. King Darius, his heart a frantic drum of fear and hope, sprinted through the palace. He reached the heavy stone sealing the lion's den, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to save you from the lions?" Silence, a chilling, heavy silence. The king held his breath, then a voice calm and steady rose from the darkness. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not harmed me, because I was found innocent before him." Tears streamed down the king's face. He collapsed to his knees, his voice a raw command, "Lift the stone, quickly!" As the guards rolled it away, the crowd gasped. There stood Daniel, completely unharmed, surrounded by lions that lounged like house cats. He stepped into the morning light, his face serene, his faith a fortress. The king embraced him, then commanded that Daniel's accusers be thrown into the very pit they had prepared. The moment they entered, the lions, no longer peaceful, overpowered them. The truth of Daniel's God was now undeniable. King Darius immediately sent a decree across his vast kingdom. "I make a law that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed." And so Daniel prospered again, a trusted advisor serving through the reigns of kings and empires. But time, as it always does, marched on. Babylon itself began to fade into history. Daniel grew old, his beard white as snow, his hands frail with age. But his eyes still burned with the fire of an unshakable faith. He had seen empires rise and fall, but he had witnessed something far greater, the steady, guiding hand of God, shaping history itself. One night, as Daniel prayed, a vision overwhelmed him. He saw the sea churned by 4 great winds, and from its depths rose 4 monstrous beasts. The first was a lion with eagle's wings, the second a bear raised on one side, the third a leopard with 4 heads, and the fourth was unlike anything on earth. It was dreadful, terrifying, with teeth of iron that devoured and crushed everything in its path. Daniel fell to his knees, trembling. But then, through the storm of his vision, he saw thrones being set in place. Upon one sat the Ancient of Days. His clothing was white as snow, his throne a blaze of fire. A river of flame flowed from his presence, and countless angels stood ready. The court was seated and the books were opened. Daniel watched as the beasts were judged. Their power was stripped away, their dominion brought to an end. Then he saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations should serve him. His dominion was everlasting, and his kingdom would never be destroyed. Daniel awoke, his body trembling, but his heart was filled with a profound joy. The visions continued throughout his life, visions of wars and kings, of angels and prophecies, of a future where knowledge would increase and faith would be tested like never before. But through it all, the message was constant. The kingdoms of men are temporary, but the kingdom of God will stand forever. In his old age, Daniel would often stand by his window, gazing west toward the land of his birth, toward Jerusalem. Though surrounded by the towering ziggurats of Babylon, his soul longed for home. Many nights, his prayer was a whisper. "O Lord, forgive the sins of your people. Let your face shine upon your sanctuary once more." The years passed. Daniel became a living legend, a symbol of unwavering hope for the exiles scattered across the world. Even as his body weakened, his spirit grew stronger. He would tell those who visited him, "Do not be afraid of lions, or fire, or kings. Fear only the Lord, for his power is greater than any earthly throne." One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Daniel sat by his window one last time. The air was still. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I have served kings, but I have belonged only to one." In that moment, a profound peace filled the room, the same peace that had walked with his friends in the furnace, the same peace that had silenced the lions. It was the presence of the God who had never left his side. Daniel's story, however, did not end with his death. It lives on. It lives on in every believer who faces a world of idols and refuses to bow. It lives on in every soul who dares to pray when the world demands silence. It lives on in the promise of that coming kingdom, the kingdom without end. Centuries later, another would walk through the fires of persecution. Another would be thrown into the jaws of death, only to rise again, the very Son of Man Daniel had seen in his vision. His name would echo across generations, and his kingdom would be the fulfillment of Daniel's ultimate hope. The story of Daniel remains a brilliant light in the darkness. It's a powerful reminder that true faith can outlast any empire, that truth can stand against any power, and that the God who shut the mouths of lions still reigns supreme over all the earth. So when the world demands that you bow, stand tall like Daniel. When fear surrounds you, pray like Daniel. And when the night seems endless, remember that morning always comes, and with it, deliverance. The God who saved Daniel is the same today, yesterday, and forever. His kingdom cannot be broken. His promises will never fail. Because real faith, it doesn't end in the den of lions. It begins there. Thank you so much for watching. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.